Welcome to part two of our three-part presentation, COVID-19 and climate change, two sides of the same coin. My name is David Whitehead, and I'm representing the Nevada County chapter of the Citizens Climate Education and Citizens Climate Lobby. And we're joined today by the Sacramento chapter as our two chapters co-sponsor our first event together. Thank you all for being here. CCL seeks to build political will for solutions to climate change. We advocate for significant reductions in carbon emissions, and we work for solutions directed at those most at risk in our society from climate impacts. Our nonpartisan activism includes both education for our communities, as well as a presence in our local congressional district offices and on Capitol Hill. We host educational events like this one so that informed people will build political will, thereby increasing the chances that our country will take serious action on climate. We support current legislation, HR 763, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which currently has 81 sponsors in the House of Representatives. Dr. Tom Stukanek will now present part two, scientific and technological solutions to climate change. Take it away, Tom.
Okay, this is part two of our three-part series, Scientific and Technical Solutions to Climate Change. I encourage you to look back on the first part, which is COVID-19 and climate change, two sides of the same coin. And there will be a part three, which I'll introduce to you in a little bit. So we're going to look at some of those issues, but start with some of these politicians discussing global warming. They're certainly not doing a very good job of stopping sea level rise, I can tell you that. But luckily, there is some hope. We have some good news. Nearly 1,500 governments worldwide have now declared climate emergencies, which sets them up to really deal with the problems and enact resolutions and legislation to force us to lower our emissions of carbon dioxide. Also, over 6,000 companies in 7,000 cities in 133 countries are implementing greenhouse gas emissions reduction actions and following the Paris Agreement protocols, which not every country is doing, unfortunately. So let's take a look at some of those solutions. How can we fix this climate change problem? In the last presentation, we've been talking about climate change, we've been talking about COVID a lot, and here's some of those pandemic heroes that we really should be thanking. Healthcare workers, policemen, grocers, first responders, doctors, nurses, and these government officials and people who are really setting the stage of how we deal with this, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, Andrew Cuomo, and all of these agencies that are really working together very nicely to bring down the COVID curve and help us solve this problem. So thanks go out to all those pandemic heroes. We also have heroes from the climate change realm. And we have scientists that have started in the 1800s that knew things about climate change, about CO2 as a heat trapping gas for a really long time. So 5 out of these 6 people were actually published in this 2014 US National Climate Assessment report. Unfortunately, this lady here, Eunice Foote, was not. It was all a man's game at that point, at least in the report it was. However, Eunice was the first person to link CO2 to global warming in 1856. So I had to recognize her as a woman scientist and push these guys aside to stick her in there. So just recognize that we have known about this heat trapping gas for a long time, and that's set us up to do many more things. Here's another one of our heroes. In 1988, James Hansen, who was the director of space studies at NASA, testified before Congress on how fast the Earth was warming, starting in 1880 to 1980, basically, going up and up, and had a model that he predicted what the future temperature of the Earth would be because of these greenhouse gases. So just keep in mind, James Hansen, we're going to see him a little bit later as well. So also, we have thousands and thousands of scientists who have worked over decades and decades doing research and writing scientific peer-reviewed papers, many of them associated with the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. they've been producing these reports, assessment reports, since 1990, about every 5 to 7 years. We expected one in 2018, but there's a lot going on, and that's been postponed till 2021 or 22. So these guys and gals working in the arena of climate change, helping us to understand what we have done and what we need to do, are producing these kinds of reports here. I just gave 3 examples. Also working with the U.S. Global Change Research Program, which I was involved in for several years as well. So they're producing a lot of information. We're doing this science-based, data-based, and it's important that we continue in that direction. So we have global solutions for climate change, and we're going to talk more about them. We have solar, we have wind, we have geothermal, we have hydro. All those can produce energy for us. We have some up-and-coming technologies like tidal ocean thermal energy conversion, which takes the difference in temperature between the top of the ocean and the bottom of the ocean. We have currents producing electricity, waves. All these are in prototype form right now. We have hydrogen fuel cells, which maybe are good for large operations, and they've tried some in cars, but we aren't quite there yet for cars. So let's move on to talk about some of these in detail. I have to put this on here. Every 2 minutes, the energy reaching the Earth from the sun is equivalent to the whole annual energy usage by humanity. That's just incredible. We have such a source of electricity and source of energy coming from the sun. We can't ignore it. And we need to use it. We are using it. And it's getting better and better in terms of pricing. But we need to focus more on capturing solar as much as we can. And we'll see a couple different options for solars in a little bit. So let's go solar as much as possible. So as California passed in 2018, as of January 1st this year, 2020, every new construction home, residential facility, has to have solar. And that will add about $9,500 to the cost of the construction. It will also save about $20,000 over the life of the home as well. So this is now law in California. We're way ahead of the curve on this. So just like the solar photovoltaic cells in the residential facilities, we also have this grid scale photovoltaics occupying massive areas, especially in the Mojave Desert and those areas in Southern California. These particular ones here are called trackers, and they move about 15 to 30 degrees to follow the sun, get the maximum incident radiation that they can for the maximum energy output. So let's look, so this is photovoltaics. Let's look at the pricing. Pricing has gone down. This is 2014, all the way down to 2018. And the price has been dropping every year, steadily, and it's still dropping now. So we're really getting mass production and also maximum utilization of photovoltaic cells. Now here's a different kind of solar called heliostats, or solar power towers. And each one of these little white dots is another mirror, and these mirrors all point and collect energy and reflect sunlight up to the top of that tower. Believe it or not, thousands of them. And basically they're heating up a liquid sodium, molten salts, which have high heat capacity, and that is able to be stored overnight when the sun is not shining. So we can use that both during the day and then at night when they extract the heat out of the molten salts to drive the turbines and produce energy from that. So tremendous operations. Again, many of these are down in the Mojave Desert in California. So let's take a look at that. Here's the Mojave. So the sort of gold colored bubbles here are photovoltaic farms. And the red bubbles are the solar power towers, the heliostats. So we've got a lot of them out there. There's some concern about environmental impacts to tortoises and things like that, but we're doing the best we can. That's a trade-off no matter what you do. So we have these options of different kinds of solar. And in March 5th of 2018, the utility grade solar, all these guys down here, met 50% of California's total electrical power demand for the very first time. That's just fantastic. Again, California is out there. Now, this isn't happening necessarily right now, but because March is not a very energy intensive needs month, but we're raising our contributions from solar all the time. So wind. Wind is probably the second best option that we have in terms of renewables. Provides 4.3% of the world's energy supplies, and which is up from 1% in 2006. So it's growing tremendously. Just came back from Germany recently, and every German village has wind power in their village, supporting them. It's everywhere, all over the landscape. And so we need to up ourselves from wind. Germany is producing those wind turbines. We need to produce wind turbines as well. Germany is eating our lunch on those, just like China is eating our lunch on solar production, so photovoltaics. So this is San Gorgonio Pass in Palm Springs, giving you an example of what some of those wind farms look like. And probably you in California may be more familiar with Altamont Pass, which is going towards San Francisco, which has a 576 megawatt plant. And it's probably one of the oldest and largest wind turbine farm in the world. So Germany is on top on that. But in other areas besides California, we have these huge ocean-based wind farms. And this is right off the coast of London. So each one of these red dots represents another wind farm out there. And so let's take a closer look at some of those areas. So here's the North Sea again. Here's London, here's Belgium, and each one of those little propeller-shaped icons is another wind farm out there. The pink area represents an area that has already been approved or that they're under construction for more wind farms in these areas. And the orange locations are those that have submitted applications to build wind farms, but they haven't been approved yet. So they're flooding this area, they're filling this area with enormous amount of wind energy options, which is providing Europe a huge amount of fossil fuel free electricity. So once we've got the electricity, what are we going to do with it? We have to potentially store it someplace to be able to use it like a battery in our flashlights. So battery storage is up and coming. The first household battery storage product was Tesla's homemade Powerwall home battery system. And this can support a home for, say, 1 to 7 days of continuous power when the grid system goes down, or if the grid system goes down. Similarly, here's one of those large photovoltaic solar plants fields. And as long as we collect that from there, we can also store it in a grid scale battery system. So again, Tesla was the first to develop one of these grid scale battery systems in South Australia, which is the first and the largest battery storage project in the world. And it's not just Tesla that's doing this. We have 7 other companies that are out there across the globe doing this, developing 400 megawatt hour battery, grid scale battery systems, shown down here. So they're up and coming, they're dotting the globe, and we are gaining on this battery process very quickly. So let's talk about transportation. This guy is producing carbon dioxide, but not that much. California's emissions of carbon dioxide are basically 40% are due to transportation because we drive so many cars here. Over the US, averaged over the US is producing about 30% of its emissions from transportation. And globally, it's only 14% of global emissions. So we have to do something about transportation, not this guy, but the one after him in the automobiles. So countries banning gas cars. All these countries here have already announced that they are banning gas cars by implementing them by these different dates, 2030, 2040, 2050. So we're making progress. We're making tremendous progress. In January of 18, California Bill AB 1745 was passed to ban all new vehicles fueled by internal combustion engines by 2040. I don't know if that actually passed. It may not have passed, and we're still resubmitting that now. But on November of last year, Governor Newsom deemed that we will have no more all gas cars for the California government. So yay for that. So if you want to help this process of electrifying our vehicles, you could buy your honey one of these things, one of those things right there. It's called a Tesla. And I'm waiting for my honey to build me one. Not build me one. She'd have a hard time doing that. Just buy me one. Don't use my money, use hers. So what can we do? If you don't want or can't afford to buy a Tesla, you could go to this website, what EV to buy, what electric vehicle do you want to buy, or go to my website. I have this on my website as well. And you can see every single manufacturer has some form of electric car, some form of electric energy for cars. So on this side, you will see how many miles you would get out of a charge. And this side, you would get to see the cost of those vehicles. So the how many miles you get is inversely proportional to how much it's going to cost. So you have this little list of cars here is sort of inverted for the other side. So you can look for hybrids of all kinds. You can look for a battery electric vehicle. You can look for a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. You can look for a fuel cell electric vehicle. But there's tons of options out here. And as we move into 2021 and 22, even more of those vehicles are going to be in the electric range. Both Dana and I drive electric vehicles. His is a pure electric, mine's a plug-in hybrid. So yay for us. And if you want to really look at what's happening in the alternative energy and renewable energy field, go to cleantechnica.com. It's a fantastic website. It's at the cutting edge of alternative energy news, and you can sign up for their news feed, and they will send you news clips, news feeds by email every week. Actually, it's every day now. So it's not so many things are happening. You'll be not on the cutting edge, you'll be on the bleeding edge of what's happening in terms of alternative energy news. So go there and check it out. So not only are automobiles getting electrified, but so are semi-trucks. And Tesla came out with the first semi-truck as well. He's really knocking them off here. And you know that Elon Musk loves speed. So you can imagine this semi here goes 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. Now that's with the cab. With the trailer attached, it's 0 to 60 in 20 seconds. Yeah, much longer period of time. Anyway, it's all electric. And there are many other companies actually that are doing this as well. Daimler, Cummins, Nikola, Thor. Nikola's making cars as well. And this is great for semis because they're often involved with truck farms, which go from point A to point B, dropping off their material, and then picking up new material, go back from point B to point A, back and forth, recharge at both ends. Perfect. No use of fossil fuels. So many of these are also planning to go autonomous, no driver vehicles. This N-Ride down here is one that is presumed to go autonomous almost right away. This is just a prototype, but I'm not sure what I would do if I saw one of those things coming at me down the road, especially without a driver. That's going to be hard to take. I think I'd just go off on the next exit. So not only semis, but the military has been on this for decades. They've been developing hybrid electric drive vehicles for a long time, even hybrid electric drive tanks and people movers and Jeeps and fuel trucks. All of these things are electrified in one way or another. And they're building, there is being built a new tank that's all electric. So you can sneak up on your enemy and nobody will hear you coming. So they're doing a lot in this area. And similarly with ferries, ferries have the same issue. They go from point A to point B to point A, back and forth, and they can utilize this technology and recharging at each end. So New York has these types of ferries in Long Island Sound, Staten Island, Ellis Island, Liberty Island, Washington State ferries, similarly in Puget Sound and Kitsap Peninsula. And the Alcatraz Hornblower ferry system has been using this for a long time. They have photovoltaic cells on the roof of the Alcatraz prison, also on the roof of each one of their ferries. And in addition, they have wind power that's creating electricity for them as well. So they are really on it. Since 2009, the entire Alcatraz fleet has been converted to some form of hybrid power. Fantastic. So the ultimate, electric planes. So that would be the last big challenge. However, Harbour Air, this company called Harbour Air in Vancouver, British Columbia, just a couple months ago, became the first commercial airline to be electric. And here's an example of one of them. This is called an Otter or a Beaver. And they used 350 to 500 to 750 horsepower electric engines. And typically this is a startup here, but they go 30 to 60 miles transporting fishermen or hunters out into the backcountry. So this is an example of what's coming. There's 7 more companies on the horizon that are doing this. So we're gaining on them fast. And Airbus has a competition now to really see who can build the best, lightest, most efficient electric airplane. And in 20 years, we're likely to have commercial airplanes that carry over 100 passengers. Imagine that. Just incredible. So let's keep our eyes open for those. Okay, in addition to being able to reduce our carbon emissions of CO2 to the atmosphere, in order to solve this problem, we really need to be taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere as well. The reason for that is that carbon dioxide, once it's put into the atmosphere, will remain there for 500 to 1,000 years. And we don't have that amount of time to wait to solve this problem. So we need to start taking that carbon dioxide that's already in the air, out of the atmosphere. So here's our best carbon dioxide taker-outer that was ever built. And trees are important, which is why we need to preserve our forests. We need to reforest. And planting a tree in your own backyard helps. Everything helps. So let's take a look at what's happening with artificial trees. This is what's called direct air capture. And this is removing the atmosphere, removing the CO2 from the atmosphere that's already there. So CO2 represents only 1 in 2,500 molecules in the air. And that's 300 times less than what's even being produced from smokestacks. But we need to reverse that process, sort of like pulling that carbon dioxide right back into the smokestacks. It's not really what's happening, but this is a global company. This is a company called Global Thermostat, and this company is one of quite a number of them that's actually doing this in prototype right now. So here's direct air capture one, first company that I'll show you. This is working with solids, these amines that pull carbon dioxide out of the air to produce a product called carbamate, which then you can do many different things with. So the first time we were able to pull carbon dioxide out of the air was developed by the Nazi scientists who used liquid sorbents to remove accumulations of CO2 in submarines. Now we're doing this to pull it out of our atmosphere. Here's one in Menlo Park by Global Thermostat. Here's another one of their plants in Huntsville, Alabama. And there are, 7 companies working on this, both in the US and also around the globe. Direct air capture facilities. They're still in prototype form, but they're making progress, and I'm sure that we have to be able to do this in order to bring our carbon dioxide down. So 50 years ago, we had the Apollo 11 Moonshot, one small step for man, and 1969. So I have always been inspired by JFK's announcement of this. Said, we choose to go to the moon. We choose to do this not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win. This is so relevant now in terms of climate as well as COVID. We need to do that. We need to take the challenge and work as hard as we possibly can to solve these problems. And the tools to put a man on the moon didn't exist at that time. It took NASA 8 years and 400,000 people to literally invent the rocket, the spaceship that could land on the moon, the spacesuits, and all of that had to be invented from scratch. And here's a little fun fact. An iPhone today has more processing power than every NASA computer in existence in the early 1960s. So we have the technology today to do this. I've been showing you some of these things, but not all of them. So trust that we have that. We just need to implement that technology. So here's the graph I showed in the previous talk. And this is carbon dioxide going up, 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 passing the year 2000, where we still haven't slowed the increase of carbon dioxide. Each one of these, again, is a model run of where we could bend the curve, like we're bending the curve for COVID. If we started in the year 2000, here's James Hansen. We didn't start then, but if we continue on, and we have continued on to 2000, we still haven't slowed it down. If we continue on up to the place we are now, if we start now, again, we would have to remove carbon dioxide from the emissions rate at about 5% per year. If we continue on the rate that we're at for the next 10 years to 2030, we would have to start reducing our emissions by 9% per year. That would be a tremendous challenge. So you can look back on the earlier talk, but this is the essence of what we need to do. We need to flatten this curve, just like we need to flatten the curve for climate change and COVID, both the same way. We need to get in there and do it, whatever it takes. So let's deal with some of the unfortunate politics. Here's our friend James Hansen again, 1988. Just coincidentally, George H.W. Bush was also in his presidential campaign in 1988, and this was his slogan: "We'll fix the global warming effect with the White House effect." And he did win that campaign and served from 1989 to 1993. He did do some good things for the environment, but unfortunately, he didn't do this one. He was an oil man. He owned his own oil company, and we never did fix that at that time. And now that brings us to 2015, which was the Paris Accord, the Paris Climate Accord, or the Paris Climate Agreement, which at that time, 2015, the Obama administration pulled together 194 countries, actually it was 196 countries, to agree to start implementing processes to reduce our emissions on the globe. Unfortunately, this Paris Agreement or Paris Accord got ratified in 2016. And unfortunately, the Trump administration in the very next year, 2017, started pulling us out of the Paris Accord. And as of November 4th of last year, we began to formally pull out of the Paris Agreement. And November 4th of this year, 2020, we will be out of the Paris Accord completely. So I think we need a new world leader to help solve this climate crisis. None of the other world leaders are stepping up to do this. And in fact, many of them have been lax in doing the actual agreements that they did in the Paris Accord. So we need someone to pull everyone together again, and let's hope we can do that. So another thing that can help in terms of slowing the output of carbon dioxide is the global fossil fuel industry subsidies. These are being given to 191 countries. 85% of those subsidies are for coal and oil. And it's hard to conceive of, but 2017, this was $5.2 trillion of subsidies going to the fossil fuel companies. They're making a lot of money, and I'm not sure why they need $5.2 trillion in subsidies. That's 6.5% of global gross domestic product. So who's doing this? Well, China is supplying some of those subsidies, like $1.4 trillion. And the US is the second largest subsidy giver at $649 billion. If we just took some of this out, why are we doing this? If we took like 2% away from the subsidies that are being granted, that's $104 billion. We could do a lot with $104 billion towards improving our ability to implement reductions of CO2 and renewable energy supplies. So let's think about that. Another thing that's happening is in the realm of divestments and investments. As of January of this year, Blackrock, which is the largest asset manager in the world, has $6.9 trillion in assets and the world's biggest owner of fossil fuel companies. BlackRock is now, as of January, putting climate change and sustainability at the core of their investment strategy. Amazing. They're also divesting investments away from coal and they're ramping up pressure on polluters. Not only BlackRock, but the biggest public bank in the world, European Investment Bank, is stopping lending to fossil fuel projects. They're allocating 8 billion euros to reduce carbon pollution and committing 1 trillion euros over the next decade to combat climate change. It's amazing. The marketplace is working even without enormous outcry. And there's a lot of outcry, but they're looking at the future, I think, because they know that alternative energy is coming to help our climate. How can you and us and all of us reduce our carbon footprint? There's lots of things that we do that help to create this carbon dioxide glut that we have. And I've got about 50 things on my website that can help you understand all the little things that you can do that helps. Every little thing does help. So this is on my website. It's tomsukonik.net. And also on my website is Dana and I have some archived presentations. We taught an 11-week climate change course, which is on there. And November 15th lecture we also did on global climate change crisis, the urgency and race for solutions. And today's presentation will be on there as well. So what are the most critical actions that we can take? We need to educate ourselves and our tribe, those peeps that you hang around with. We need to communicate with our mocks. That's not moccasins, that's members of Congress. So what can we do? I've talked to many legislators and their staff, and they say to me every time that every single piece of information, whether it's a tweet, a postcard, a letter, an email, anything that they receive on somebody's information of their opinion on something, they assume that that represents somewhere between 100 and 1,000 other individuals who would never think of communicating with their members of Congress. So write those letters, join a group, send those tweets, just get involved. You can do that with any of the CCL groups as well. So one of the most important things is, of course, vote. Vote in all local, state, and national elections for those individuals who will work hard to solve this global crisis. So here's a map that shows where those areas are on the Earth that are putting a price on carbon, which is going to help a lot. The big areas are countries, the bigger circles are states, smaller circles are cities. So we know that there's a lot going on out there. But Dana is going to talk in part 3 about the legislative and market-based solutions to climate change. And I encourage you all to watch his presentation right after this one. So there we have it. Vote every time, all the time. Thank you very much.